Story time with Mr. Beat.
Hola, me llamo Mr. Beat. Texas is like a whole other country. As a matter of fact, it actually used to be a whole other country. Here's the story of the Texas Revolution.
Once upon a time, there was a country called Spain. Columbus started claiming land for Spain in 1492, and over the next several decades, other conquistadors ended up claiming large parts of the Americas, including present-day Texas. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, Spain had a hard time getting Spanish settlers to move to Texas. In 1690, Spanish authorities, worried that France posed a threat, built missions across Texas, but Native Americans who already lived in the area attacked them and drove them out. However, eventually treaties were signed, deals were made, and many Native Americans converted to Christianity. This made Texas a more peaceful place, and slowly, Spanish settlers began to trickle into the territory. These people became known as Tejanos, or people of Spanish heritage who called Texas home. Still, in 1821, only about 4,000 Tejanos lived in Texas. That same year, the country of Mexico was established after declaring its independence from Spain. Now that Mexico controlled Texas, they wanted to find a way to protect its settlers there from raids by the Comanche Indians. Their solution? Open up Texas to immigration. After all, plenty of Americans wanted to move there. One of those Americans was Stephen Austin. His dad, Moses Austin, was given permission by the Spanish government to start a colony in Texas, but he died shortly after this. By the time Stephen Austin arrived in Texas, Mexico was now in charge. The Mexican government told Austin he could start a colony as long as he only brought moral and hardworking settlers who promised to become Mexican citizens, join the Catholic Church, and learn Spanish. Austin agreed to Mexico's terms. Between 1821 and 1827, he had attracted 297 families, soon known as the Old 300, to Texas. The success of Austin's colony attracted more land speculators and American settlers to Texas. Some were looking for a new life, some were escaping from the law, and others were looking for a chance to grow rich. By 1830, the population had swelled to around 30,000, with Americans outnumbering the Tejanos 6-1. The Mexican government had outlawed slavery, but many Americans were bringing their slaves with them anyway, often to work on big cotton plantations. Most Americans didn't want to learn Spanish or follow Mexican laws, and very few of them converted to Catholicism. The Mexican government was getting pretty angry. In 1829, they closed Texas to further American immigration, but many Americans were illegally crossing the border and settling in Texas anyway. Those darn illegal Americans sneaking into Mexico? The Tejanos generally did not like these Americans because most Americans showed little respect for Mexican culture and had no intention of actually becoming citizens. The Americans in Texas were also angry. They weren't allowed to have slaves and had to start paying taxes. They had to follow Mexican laws they didn't agree with. They also didn't like the new guy in charge, Mexican President General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Santa Anna was a dictator who enjoyed being in charge. He once boasted, "If I were God, I would wish to be more." Santa Anna began to send thousands of Mexican troops to Texas to enforce the laws. Americans in Texas, led by people like William Travis, began calling for revolution. Stephen Austin didn't want to go that far and thought he could work to reform the Mexican government. In 1833, Austin traveled to Mexico City and asked Santa Anna to allow immigration to Texas again, make Texas a separate state, and many other things. Santa Anna agreed to allow immigration, but refused to grant the request for statehood. Oh yeah, and then he tossed Austin in jail for trying to promote a rebellion, although Austin was never officially charged. This really made Americans in Texas angry. By the time Austin was released from jail in 1835, it was too late to undo any damage. The Americans were ready to revolt. By this time, even many Tejanos were in favor of independence. On October 2, 1835, Mexican soldiers were sent to the town of Gonzales to retrieve a cannon stationed there to fight off Indian attacks. The Texans in town would not let soldiers enter town. There was a standoff, but eventually some of the Texans began to fire on the soldiers, causing them to retreat. the Texas War of Independence had officially begun. Throughout October, volunteers made up of people from all kinds of backgrounds joined up across Texas, building up supplies and preparing for the Mexican army to arrive. The rebels, led by Stephen Austin, who had no real military training, surrounded the city of Bejar. Wait, what? Bejar? Today that city's called San Antonio. There, General Martín Perfecto de Cos, Santa Anna's brother-in-law, led Mexican forces to defend the city from the siege by the Texans. For 2 months, the city was under siege, until finally General Cos surrendered on December 12, 1835, and all Mexican forces left the city. Things were looking up for the Texans, and many thought independence was near. But Santa Anna wasn't going to let that happen. He stepped down from his duties as president to lead an army of several thousand that headed north towards Texas, arriving in San Antonio on February 23, 1836. They promptly recaptured the city from the Texans, who were not prepared for the attack. Around 200 men, among them William Travis, and famous frontiersman and politician Davy Crockett, fled to a nearby Catholic mission called the Alamo. The men boldly defended the mission for nearly 13 days, until on March 6th, Santa Anna launched an early morning assault, killing nearly everyone at the Alamo. One survivor was Susanna Dickinson, who Santa Anna sent to spread of the Texan defeat to other Texans. It was during the Battle of the Alamo that in Washington on the Brazos, the Convention of 1836 was also taking place, where Texan delegates formally declared independence, forming the Republic of Texas. When word got out about the losses at the Alamo, many Texans started to freak out and flee their homes, heading east. However, many also were now inspired to join the Texas Army, and for the rest of the war, "Remember the Alamo" became their rallying cry. Also, a new dude was now in charge of the Texas forces, Sam Houston, who had been building up his forces secretly for weeks. To Santa Anna, it looked like Houston and his forces were retreating and scared out of their minds. After all, the losses at the Alamo were devastating, and the Mexican army outnumbered the Texas army by almost 6-1. Santa Anna was confident that the rebels would surrender soon, and he divided his troops into 3 groups and spread them out to other areas of Texas. Houston, meanwhile, was having his troops retreat, but it was all part of his plan. On the afternoon of April 21, 1836, Houston and the Texas Army caught Santa Anna completely by surprise by attacking his men, who were camped out near Lynchburg Ferry. It became known as the Battle of San Jacinto, and it was basically over in about 18 minutes. During the fighting, many Texan soldiers repeatedly screamed out, "Remember the Alamo!" It was basically a massacre. Half of Santa Anna's men were killed, and nearly all the others were taken prisoner. Santa Anna himself was captured the next day. He was forced to sign papers ordering all Mexican forces out of Texas and recognizing the independence of Texas. After a mob of Texans demanded to kill Santa Anna, some decided that he stay alive to try to help out with the protection of the new country of Texas. However, unknown to Santa Anna, the Mexican government got rid of his powers, and Texas independence wasn't fully recognized by them for several years after this. Mexico would make several attempts to retake Texas, but after San Jacinto, they never had a realistic chance. Sam Houston became the first president of Texas. Stephen Austin, who lost to Houston for the presidency, became his Secretary of State, but died 2 months later. Houston gave him the label Father of Texas. Texas was a country for almost 10 years, a time marked by much conflict, but also a time looked back upon with great pride by modern Texans. On December 29, 1845, Texans agreed to be annexed by the United States, and Texas became the 28th state. Today, it's safe to say that no other state has quite as interesting of a history as Texas, which is now the second most populous state in the country. The end.